Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well. This is the lecture video for Thursday, April 2nd. So the quiz over this lecture will be due Friday the 3rd at midnight. Something I wanted to mention about the quizzes that I didn't mention on the last video, but you've probably already come to realize, I'm going to start having the quizzes go back to one attempt since you can watch them back while you quiz, and I'm going to make the time unlimited. So you have as much time as you need to finish the quiz, but only one attempt since you can follow along and take the quiz while you watch the lecture, which I think will be, I hope will be a good thing. Keep you paying attention, looking for those important things in the lecture. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions about that, any problems with it, or anything at all. Your next test is next week. So test 2 is next week. We do still have a lecture next week as well, so I will post that lecture on Monday. I'll post it a day early, but your quiz still won't be due until Wednesday at midnight, so you'll have 3 full days to finish that quiz. I just want to get that lecture out there a little bit earlier so that you have more time to watch it, so that you have you can get it done quicker, so you can start focusing on the test earlier if you so choose. So I will post the test next week on Wednesday, and you will have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to finish it. So it'll be due Sunday at midnight. You'll have 5 days to do it. I will make the time limit the same as class would be, so an hour and 15. If you have accommodation, shoot me an email and let me know, and I can make your test length time a little bit longer if that's what you need. Just shoot me an email. I will also post the test study guide on Monday with that first lecture, so you'll have a few days to look at that before your test is posted on Wednesday. And yeah, I think that's all I've got for housekeeping. So today we'll start on chapter 9. I originally had 2 days scheduled for chapter 9, but with the changes and everything, I had to shrink it down to one full lecture, or one full chapter into one lecture. So I took out a lot of things. I hope I left just the most important parts, and I hope it's not too long. I think I shortened it enough to make it manageable. So let's get rolling. All right. So this chapter is over thinking, language, and intelligence. So we'll kind of start with thinking, move to language, and then move to intelligence. As for thinking, the term cognition is what we use to refer to any and all mental processes. So you're thinking, knowing, remembering, communicating, any mental activity going on. So whenever we are thinking about things in our lives, in our daily lives, we use what we call concepts. So this is kind of our mental group of similar things, similar objects, similar events, similar ideas, similar people. So you have a concept for chairs and what chairs are, concept for cars and what cars are, concept for what family is for you, concept for technology, concept for furniture. And so everything in that concept kind of shares some similarities. So you have a concept for chair, for example. Not every chair is the same, but your concept just have some general commonalities. So probably 4 legs, you probably sit on it, and it maybe has a back. So there's lots of things that can fit into your concept of chair. A high chair, a rocking chair, a recliner, a chair connected to a desk at school. So there's lots of different things that fit into that concept. They're all a little bit different, but they do have commonalities. And this just kind of simplifies our thinking. Concepts give us a lot of information about something with very little cognitive effort. So from our concepts, we have prototypes. So our prototype is essentially our best example, our mental image of our best example of something in a category or a concept. So for example, you guys all have concepts for birds. And a robin and a penguin are both birds. True. However, I would imagine that a robin probably fits your prototype a little bit better. It's probably more similar to that best example of a bird you have in your head. So if I asked you, is a robin a bird? You would say yes. And then if I asked you, is a penguin a bird? You'd say yes, but it would be a quicker response for the robin question because it fits your prototype more closely. You're able to recognize it as fitting into that concept a little bit faster. So it just kind of gives us using prototypes gives us a quicker and easier way of sorting new things into our existing concepts. So thinking is really important when it comes to problem solving, right? A lot of the times when we're thinking, this is what we're doing. We're solving problems and making decisions. So a couple of the strategies that we can use whenever we are problem solving, one of them is trial and error, right? Try, fail, try again. Try, fail, try again. This is what Thomas Edison did, right? Whenever he was trying to figure out the light bulb, doesn't work, try again. Doesn't work, try again. This is what you do when you're trying to figure out somebody's password. You're guessing, trying, doesn't work, try again. So something else that we could do to guarantee us a solution, to definitely find us an answer, is to use an algorithm. So an algorithm is this methodical, logical rule that you can follow that would guarantee a solution to a problem. So for example, if I gave you these letters listed on the slide and asked you to find me the word that these letters would spell out, you can use an algorithm to figure that out. You can, take one letter and make that the beginning, and then every single combination of the rest of the letters, and then use a different letter at the beginning and use the same rule over and over and over again to find every single possible position that every letter can be in. You can use that rule to find the answer. And this algorithm will give you 907,000 possibilities, but you will find an answer using an algorithm. So algorithms take a really long time, but they do give you a solution. The other option would be to use heuristics. So this is kind of simplifying our thinking strategy by using more efficient methods. So using shortcuts, using your prior knowledge and judgments to decide when to shortcut an algorithm. So for example, you might instead maybe mentally eliminate those patterns that aren't logical, like two Y's together, that you wouldn't see that in a word. So you would take that out. Usually CHs go together, so you might combine those and leave out possibilities that the CH isn't together. And then use trial and error that way. So kind of trying to simplify your strategies and using your prior knowledge to shorten that algorithm that would take way too long most of the time. The word is psychology, if you didn't catch it already. So sometimes we can solve problems without using any of these sort of strategies at all. Sometimes the answer to a problem just comes to us suddenly, and we call this insight. So there was never any really feeling of getting warmer or closer to the answer. It just kind of pops into your head like a light bulb, and that's called insight, which is certainly interesting because, like it implies, it doesn't require any effort, any problem-solving strategies to be used. And so people have done research on this. They are trying to find, why, how. That's impressive. I wish we could all do that all the time, not have to use any strategies and just be able to figure it out. And they have found this kind of area on the brain is stimulated whenever people do have this sudden realization, this insight. So maybe, I don't know, maybe this is kind of the key to helping us solve our problems more efficiently. However, when we are trying to solve problems, we come across obstacles that get in the way of us finding the best solution to things. And one of those is confirmation bias. So this is our tendency to search for information that supports our pre-existing beliefs, and also ignoring evidence to the contrary, evidence that doesn't support our beliefs. So we do this all the time, right? For lots of things. You have your opinion and you like to focus in on things that support that and then ignore things that don't. So like whenever you say you have a preconception that all women are bad drivers and you watch a woman back into a pole, your first thought is, aha, see, look, there's your evidence. Women are bad drivers. But if you saw a man do the same thing, you might maybe ignore it, maybe not pay attention, or maybe just attribute it to a mistake or a bad day or something like that. So we're always kind of looking for and pointing out evidence for things that do support our beliefs and ignoring things that provide evidence to the contrary. Same thing with like your political beliefs, right? If you believe that we should have stronger gun control, then you are more inclined to find news articles and share news articles and stuff like that that support that belief, like mass shootings and people who should have been red flagged. And you say, see, we need more gun control. But if you think that we should have weaker gun control, then you might search for news that supports your beliefs, like you know, a person in the public disarming a shooter with their own guns or something like that. And then kind of ignoring those other ones that do support stronger gun control. Another obstacle to our problem-solving abilities is this fixation. So our inability to adopt a new perspective about a problem. Just not being flexible in how we are viewing the problem and kind of looking at it in the same way over and over again and never really changing that. And so one kind of example of this, one kind of way this works is our mental state. So this is a mental state is our tendency to approach problems with a mindset that has worked previously. And we're kind of fixated on that mental state and not able to look at a problem in a different way. And that's why, you know, getting a fresh set of eyes to look at your work is really helpful a lot of the times, right? Because that person has a different mental state. They're coming at the problem in a different way that you haven't looked at in the past. So they're maybe instantly able to find a different way because they have a different mental state and you've been looking at it in the same way for a long time. So for example, if I asked you to look at this pattern and then tell me what the last 3 letters in the pattern were. I'll let you look at it for a second and tell me what you think. So it's kind of tough, right? I will say that the last 3 are F, S, S, if that helps. If you haven't gotten it already, the pattern is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's the first letter of every number. Okay, so giving you that mental set kind of helps to do this one. So if I asked you to tell me the last 3 letters in this pattern, the answer is MJJ, if you hadn't got it already, because this one is January, February, March, April, May, June, July. So it's the first letter of months. So I bet that this one was a little bit easier to do because you already had that mental set. You already had an idea of how to solve problems like this in the past, which helps you solve this problem now. So sometimes our mental set does help us solve problems, but sometimes it can be hard to kind of get past that mental set and look at problems differently. That's why, like, if you've ever played headbands, you know, you put it on your head and you have to ask questions to guess what your card says. And I'm sure you guys have all seen people kind of get stuck asking the same kinds of questions. They're on the same track and they're on the wrong track, and it's hard for them to get past that set of questioning that they're using. It's because their mental set is not helping them. They've got that same mental set that they're trying to use to solve the problem, and it's not working. So when it comes to making decisions and judgments, there's a couple things that we like to use. One of those is our intuition, and that's just kind of our automatic feeling, our automatic thought, our gut feeling. This is kind of contrasted with more conscious, effortful reasoning. So this is just something we kind of do without trying, whereas using these heuristics is a little bit more thought through. So for example, we can also use a representativeness heuristic to help us make decisions and judgments. So this means that we estimate the likelihood of events based on how well they match our prototype. So for example, if I asked you, if I told you there was a man who was very small, slim, he was really short, and he liked to read poetry, and I asked you, is this man an Ivy League professor of classics, or is this a truck driver? You'd probably say professor, right? Because this description fits your prototype of an Ivy League professor the best. But statistically, there are so few Ivy League professors in the world of classics, especially. Only a handful. But there are so many truck drivers out there that it is much more likely that this person I'm describing is a truck driver, because that's what statistics and logic say, is that there are more truck drivers, this guy's more likely to be a truck driver. So we kind of bypass that logic and statistics and use this representativeness heuristic to make that decision for us. So it kind of might cause us to override our use of logic. This is where a lot of our prejudice and racism comes from. If your prototype of a terrorist looks like an Arab person, then whenever you see an Arab person, you might react more negatively and become more anxious because your prototype is wrong, not because they've done anything, because you kind of ignore the logic that tells you that the majority of Arab people are not terrorists. Right? Does that make sense? Guess you can't answer me. Another type of heuristic that we use is the availability heuristic. So this is estimating the likelihood of events based on their availability in our memory. So either because they happened really recently, something happened really recently, so it's fresh in your mind, or maybe it was something really vivid and memorable, so it really sticks out in your memory. So if an instance comes readily to mind, you might presume that they happen more often, that they're more common. So like seeing a school shooting on the news or seeing a terrorist attack on the news, it's really recent in your mind, it's really vivid in your mind, so you might estimate that it's more likely to happen than it is. And I mean, people use that, companies use that, the news uses that to influence how you make decisions in your judgment of what's going on because of this availability heuristic. They know that those things that stick out in your mind, you feel like they happen more often. Another thing that influences our ability to make decisions and judgments is this idea of belief perseverance. So belief perseverance is our tendency to cling to our beliefs, even when we're faced with contrary evidence. In fact, a lot of the times when you hear evidence that contradicts your beliefs, this only strengthens your belief. Because you are now being forced to defend your belief and support it even stronger. You hold on to that so tightly once you've picked a side. It takes much more compelling evidence to change your belief than it does to make it in the first place. Because that's what we want to do. We want to be right. We want to hold on to our beliefs and support it and find ways to work around contradicting evidence because we hold on to that so tightly. So if you want to change someone's mind, what you should not do is keep fighting them and keep allowing them to defend their argument more and more and more. Something else that influences our decision making is framing. So this is the way that we present information. So if a doctor says that there's a 10% chance you'll die, this will give you a different reaction than if the doctor says there's a 90% chance that you'll live. So this is the same information, but it's presented in a different way. It's framed in a different way, which influences how you feel about it, and maybe change your mind as to whether you do take that surgery or do get on that medicine. Shifting the way that they present information shifts your perception, even if it's the same information, just presented in a different way. Something that I thought was interesting was listed in your book that donating organs in countries where the default option is yes, but you can opt out, is nearly 100% that they agree to be donors. In countries like the US, where the default is no, because here they ask you, do you want to opt in, and you have to say yes. It's automatically a no. There's only a 25% donation rate. So other countries have nearly 100% donation rate, and we only have 25% just because of the way that we frame the question. So once you know what framing is and how to use it, companies, politicians, they can all use that to change how they frame information that's given to you and change your perception and change the way you make decisions. Okay, so that's kind of thinking. So now we'll shift gears to language, but they're both really interconnected, right? Because we think with our language, and before we have language, we don't really have a lot of thought, or at least thought that we can remember, right? So like infantile amnesia, our inability to remember things that happen when we're, born to age 4-ish, is because we don't have language to store our memories with. So language is very important when it comes to thinking. And so obviously when we're born, we're not born with the ability to produce language. What we start with is receptive language. So we recognize differences in speech sounds. They can kind of start discriminating between different types of sounds, different types of vowels by like 4 months. And they can also read lips. And we also see that they show a preference for when the face and sound matches. So they kind of start to be able to tell what mouth noises make what sounds, and they understand when they don't match, when you're trying to confuse them. So first they can just comprehend others and their speech. That's receptive language. And then they start to develop this new skill of productive language. So they start to produce their own language around 4 months. They'll start to babble, make those babbling sounds, goos and gaws and ahs and whatever. What I thought was interesting is that your book says that deaf babies who watch their deaf parents talk through sign will actually start to babble with their hands and babble through sign, which I thought was really cool. And then by 10 months, they'll start to kind of mimic some noises through babbles, like mama or dada. And then by about a year, they have one-word speech. So they'll start to label things that they want or that they see with just one word. So we call that tacting. So, cookie, kitty, things like that, one word. And then at about 18 months, their word learning explodes. They start to learn a lot of stuff really fast. So they go from like one word a week to learning like one new word a day. So they start getting the skill really, really fast. And then by age 2, they have 2-word speech. So mostly like a noun and a verb together. Get ball, go car, things like that. And then a little bit after that, they start to develop into complete sentences pretty quickly. So something else that's important to consider when we think about language development is this critical period. So our ability to master a language is pretty lost by age 7. So if you want to learn a language or to learn a second language, it's very important to be taught before that age, because if you learn it after that, you can never really master it. You can certainly learn things and learn words, learn vocab, but mastering the structure and the grammar is pretty impossible after this critical period. Like this graph over here shows, this is giving people a grammar test, people at different ages at arrival when they're immigrating to a place that speaks English. And the older that they were when they immigrated and learned that second language, the harder it is to master that grammar. So it's very important to learn a second language if you're wanting your kid to, or your students to, before that age. The same is true for deaf children. So if kids are born deaf and their parents don't know sign, they will never really be as good at sign as other peers who were taught sign before the age of 7. If your parents didn't teach you sign before the age of 7, you're never going to do it as well as if your parents did teach you sign. So if you ever happen to have a deaf child, it's super important to learn their language and teach them that language, because if you don't, they won't ever be as good at it. So yeah, critical periods. I'm going to skip over damage to the language parts of our brain, but just know that there are 2 specific areas in the brain that if you do damage those parts, we see kind of different problems in speech and language. And I encourage you to watch those videos and look at the difference between them on your own time. All right, so that's language. So we'll kind of shift gears over into intelligence. So intelligence is our ability to learn from experience, solve problems, and use our knowledge to adapt to new situations. So intelligence is not about how much you know. Intelligence is about how good you are at learning something new. How quickly can you pick things up? How well can you solve new problems? And there's a couple different theories on what really constitutes intelligence. Is it one general ability, or is it kind of broken into specific abilities, is kind of the question. So one theory is, and the most accepted theory is this idea of general intelligence, or G, the G factor. So Spearman kind of made this up, and he says that our mental abilities, or our intelligence, kind of underlies all of our mental abilities. So everything on an intelligence test is measuring this G factor. So a high intelligence kind of affects everything that you do. It kind of influences you all around in every aspect. Now there are other theories that point to multiple intelligences, multiple areas that you can have differing levels of ability. But research really does confirm the existence of that general G overall factor. So typically a high intelligence in one area does mean a high intelligence in all areas. So I won't go over all of those theories of multiple intelligence. But there is one that I just wanted to mention, this idea of emotional intelligence. I thought was an important one to talk about. So emotional intelligence is kind of made of these 4 abilities. So perceiving emotions, recognizing them in people's faces, recognizing emotion in music and stories, understanding emotions, being able to understand where they're coming from and predict them, and kind of notice how they change, managing emotions, so knowing how to express them, in certain situations, how to cope with negative ones, and then using emotions to kind of enable you to be adaptive and problem solve using your emotions. And I wanted to mention this idea of emotional intelligence because they found that people with higher emotional intelligence have higher quality interactions with others. They can read people, they know what to say and do, and they can control their own emotions. So it's very possible for them to get farther in life, farther in their marriage, farther do better in parenting and in their career than someone who is academically intelligent. So I just wanted to include that to illustrate that getting good grades is not all that there is to life. A lot of the times it's these other skills like this emotional intelligence that will get you farther and make you happier. But these here are the other theories of multiple intelligence. So this one is kind of the general one that's accepted. So this idea that intelligence is all kind of one thing and it covers all of your mental abilities is Spearman's general intelligence, and then these are the two theories of multiple intelligence that we didn't get to go over, and then emotional intelligence. So you can look into these a little bit more if you want to on your own. So when we assess intelligence, we're using intelligence tests, right? So these measure our mental aptitudes and compare them to others. So it's looking at your ability to learn new things, and it compares that to other people who are similar to you. Whereas achievement tests are used to reflect what has been learned. So this is based on previous knowledge. Did you master specific content that you were taught? So this is like your final exam. Any test in school really is an achievement test. Whereas an aptitude test is designed to predict your ability to learn something new in the future. So like the ACT, you weren't necessarily being tested on something that you had been taught. They were trying to see and predict how well you would do in college. If you go to grad school, you're going to do the same thing with the GRE. It's not something that you study for all of the answers. It's something that is supposed to predict your future success in grad school. So an intelligence test is kind of a mental aptitude test to see how well you might do in school or at learning something new. So the first IQ test was made by Binet when France passed a law requiring that all children go to school. And they needed a test to identify kids who wouldn't do well in a regular classroom and who needed special ed. So Binet made this test assuming that all children kind of follow the same course of intellectual development, but that some children just kind of do it more quickly or slower than others. So under that assumption, he says that dull kids are just kind of performing at a level that's typical of younger kids, and bright kids are just performing at a level that's typical of older kids. So using this, he kind of developed this idea of mental age. So mental age is the typical level of performance associated with a certain chronological age. So Terman, what he wanted to do was give intelligence a numerical number relative to the performance of other people at the same age and the same gender and stuff like that. So he was the one that developed the idea of IQ, an intelligence quotient, a number that represents your intelligence. So instead of saying that a 9-year-old has a mental age of 9, he would say that a 9-year-old has an IQ of 100 if they were average. So 100 is the average IQ. So if an 8-year-old has a mental age of 10, if he's a pretty bright kid, then he would have an IQ of 125 using this math equation that you don't have to know. So this kind of works with kids, but it wasn't working well for adults because of this math equation. So if a 40-year-old was performing at the same mental ability as a 20-year-old, then he was given an IQ of 20, which is not okay. That's not an accurate representation of their mental ability. So just know that we don't actually use this IQ anymore. But the term IQ is still used as a replacement to say intelligence test score, just so you know. This IQ doesn't really exist anymore. So what we do use to measure intelligence now is a Wechsler test. I imagine a lot of you guys have probably had one done. A lot of you guys might have had one done before you even remember doing so. So what a Wechsler test does is it gives us scores on a couple different categories. So verbal comprehension, perceptual reasoning, working memory, and processing speed. There's different versions for different ages. So there's an adult, a child, and then a preschool, really young kid one. And what the WAIS has on it is a couple different types of tasks. And we're never really supposed to go into a lot of detail about them, because if you are to take this test, you're not supposed to know anything about it going into it, because that's not a measure of your ability to learn a new skill. That's your measure of how well you studied for this test. You weren't supposed to. So it asks you questions about similarities, how are a cat and a horse alike? And then it kind of gets more abstract to how are love and hate alike, things like that. And then basic vocabulary, what is this? What is this? What's the definition of this? Block design. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to move my head. I tried to do that in the last video, and my head actually didn't move in the recording. It said that it did, and it didn't. So I'm sorry if you can't see this picture of the block design, but these are the Wechsler blocks, and they'll just kind of, there's little pieces that have two sides that are all red, two sides that are all white, and two sides that are half and half, and then they'll show you kind of a pattern, and you have to make a copy of the pattern with the blocks. And then there's letter number sequencing, so they'll tell you a combination of letters and numbers, and then they'll ask you to repeat them back exactly. They'll ask you to repeat them back backwards, and they'll ask you to repeat them back with the numbers in order and then the letters in order. So it gets kind of tougher every time. So how do we know if an IQ test is a good test? Well, the Wechsler test, the one that's mostly used, is a good test because it has these things. So a good test is standardized. So telling you the number of questions that you got right on an IQ test doesn't really tell you anything at all. What matters, what you need to do, is compare your score to a similar group of people, same age, same gender, etc. And standardization is that process of defining what your score means relative to other people similar to you. So when doing that, we get scores that land kind of in this normal curve. So what that means is that an average score, if you did with an average of other people similar to you, you have a score of 100. 100 is an average IQ score. And then our scoring kind of falls under this bell curve. So what that means is that the majority of people center around average, and then less and less people score towards the farther away you get from average. So 68% of people have a score that's within one standard deviation of average, 15 points. So that's the majority of people. And then 95% of people fall within 2 standard deviations. That's the vast majority. Almost everyone is between 2 standard deviations of the average. And then there's very few people that are farther than that away. So I think that's something to consider when you're, talking to someone, you're getting annoyed, just know that technically, statistically, half of people have an IQ below average. Something to consider. Something else that tells us if a test is a good test is whether or not it's reliable. So reliable means will it give you a dependably consistent score? Will you get the same score over and over if you take it again and again? So there's a couple of different types of reliability. I won't go into these ones though because I'm getting short on time, but reliability is essentially, does it give you the same score over and over and over again? Validity tells us, does the test measure what it says it's going to measure? So in this case, an IQ test says, this test will tell you how successful someone will be in school. Does the test do that? Does it predict what it says it's going to predict? Do people with high IQ scores really do better in school? And the answer is yes. It does have predictive validity. So, for example, when you have a broken scale that's always 5 pounds off, you're always going to get a consistent measurement of yourself. So it's going to be reliable, but your measurement won't be valid because it's not accurately measuring what it's supposed to be measuring. So it is reliable, but not valid. As for your IQ score over time, it's really not best to test someone before the age of 3 because your IQ can kind of shift a little bit in that time frame. But by the age of 4, they can really start to be good predictive tools. But it's by the age of 11 that we have very, very impressive stability over time. So your score at 11 will very closely predict what your score will be at 70. For example, this graph, what they did was they tested people at the age of 11 and then at the age of 80. And they found a very strong positive correlation. People whose scores were high at 11 were high at 80. People whose scores were low at 11 were low at 80. Intelligence has a very, very impressive stability over time. It stays the same throughout your life. So what influences our intelligence? How do we know how intelligent we're going to be? A lot of it has to do with heritability. So we know for sure that our genes and our biology does play a pretty big role in our intelligence. What's kind of up for debate is how much. We have researchers that estimate anywhere between 50 to 75% of the variations in intelligence to be attributable to genes. So it does play a pretty big role. So for example, we see that identical twins who are raised together, so genes and environment are the same, have like a 0.85 correlation in intelligence, which is very high. Whereas there's a small decrease if they're raised apart in correlation, which shows us that there is an environmental factor to that. So changing the environment does change the intelligence. But we see that fraternal twins, so not the exact same DNA, that were raised together, have a little bit of a lower correlation than that, which does show a genetic effect. Also, another thing that really shows the genetic influence that that plays a role on intelligence is looking at kids who are adopted and their relation in intelligence to their adoptive parents versus their biological parents. And we see that over time, kids are very similar to their birth parents. So whether or not they were raised at home or raised with adopted parents, their IQ is still very similar to their birth parents and not their adoptive parents. This purple is adoptive children and their adoptive parents, and the correlation is very low because the genes is what's playing a big role in their intelligence. Okay, so that's all I got for you today. I'm sorry this one was a little bit long. I'm going to try to keep them a bit shorter, but I had to combine 2 lectures into one, so hope it wasn't too bad for you. The quiz should be posted now, so you will have until Friday at midnight to get your quiz done. Shoot me an email if you have any questions at all. See you guys.